Before the conversation gets started, I'd like to extend the appreciation to the National Directors Guild of Canada's Hans Engel and Julian Lund for helping to organize, produce, and promote this event. Now, please join me in honoring this request and acknowledgement. Wherever you are in Canada or elsewhere in the world, please take a moment to honor our Indigenous peoples' long history of welcoming many nations to their beautiful territories. I'm grateful for all that we have and am committed to upholding and uplifting the voices and values of our host nations. We also acknowledge those who came here forcibly, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. Therefore, we honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. The goal of tonight's event is to help provide basic familiarity in working with the volume wall and insight into the process from beginning to end, so that designing and working with the volume wall seems feasible for a range of intentions and budgets. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce the fantastic and experienced panel that is assembled tonight, all having collaborated on the Star Trek franchise. So bring your cameras on. We have production designer Doug McCullough, who designed both TV and movies. He has repped the DGC art department on both the national and the Ontario boards. Over his career, Doug has navigated the art department's pivot from pencils and drafting boards to the controversial introduction of computer drafting and 3D digital set design. Yep, it used to be controversial. Doug's team on Star Trek Discovery was the first in Canada to build assets for an artificial reality wall, and he has collaborated with many brilliant DGC art department members for over 25 years. And I know he's happy to quote, making beautiful work together. Matt Morgan is a Toronto-based art director and designer who has collaborated on more than a dozen virtual production sets for the Star Trek franchise, including Star Trek Discovery Seasons 4 and 5, Section 31, and the upcoming Starfleet Academy series. Connor Lucas is a Toronto-based concept artist and Unreal Engine specialist who has contributed to the Star Trek art department since 2022, working on Star Trek Discovery Season 5, Star Trek Section 31, and the upcoming Starfleet Academy series. Alex Wood has been the visual effects supervisor in Toronto, overseeing the production side of the recent Star Trek TV series, on over 90 cumulative episodes of Discovery, Strange New Worlds, and currently on Starfleet Academy. Since the initial construction of the virtual production stage in Toronto, Alex has worked in tandem with the art department, directors, and directors of photography who successfully film on over 45 virtual production environments. Philip Lanyon is a cinematographer and vice president of the Canadian Society of Cinematographers. His work in virtual production includes seasons 4 and 5 of Star Trek Discovery and the upcoming season of Starfleet Academy. An expert in volume wall technology, he has led masterclasses on virtual production in Vancouver and Toronto. And finally, our moderator for tonight's conversation is Tiana Petrovich, a Toronto-based production designer and art director who for 10 years has brought her vision to many projects, including the upcoming sci-fi feature Star Trek Section 31. Prior to that, she art directed Star Trek Strange New Worlds and The Handmaid's Tale. She was also the production designer on CBC's award-winning web series How to Fail as a Pop Star and the feature film The End of Sex. So without further ado, take it away, gang, and I'll see you at the very, very end and have a great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Marian. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's absolutely nauseating how many people are on here, but we really hope that this panel tonight is going to be interesting and useful to all of you, and hopefully it makes using the volume wall seem less daunting to those of you who have never worked with one in the past. So just to start right off the top, I'm just going to talk about what a volume wall is. I wish it was in the Webster's dictionary, but it's not. Girl dinner is, though. You can look that up. Look it up. I swear, it's in there. Let's start by sharing a couple of photos because I think visuals are always helpful. Alrighty. So this is what a typical volume wall looks like on maybe a slightly bigger production. This one we used on a couple Star Treks. and it's a kind of an open mouth at one end and a bunch of curved high-end LED panels. And when these are turned on, this is it from the back. You can see it's a lot of tech. When these are turned on, there's either video footage that's displayed on the panels or 3D content. It forms a background behind actors. So essentially, these walls replace green screens with giant digital screens. And the key difference is that the volume wall updates its visuals as the camera moves using tracking technology, which we'll get into a little bit later. So instead of being an inert surface in the background, it is it's constantly responding to what the camera's doing. That's just to give you an idea. This is a slightly smaller version. So we hope that, through this panel, as Marianne said, a lot of you can feel like that using a volume wall is feasible at a range of budgets because it's really, depending on the scale, it's a great tool for commercials, for short films, features, big TV shows, I think. And I hope that all of you will find this information useful. So I'll stop sharing now. And I will hand it over to Doug. Just before we get into the nitty-gritty, he's going to set the stage for us with some brief insights into the philosophy of working with a volume wall and how the art department might approach it specifically. So off to you, Doug.
Thanks, Tiana. So, what you're about to see tonight is very cool and exciting. It's sophisticated and technically complicated, and it takes the creativity and cleverness of many people in many departments to make it come to life. When I first got the job as the production designer on Discovery, they told me that we would be using an artificial wall, and I had no idea what it was, and I had no idea how to do it or where to start. Jason Zimmerman, who's Alex's boss, really set my mind at ease when I told him that I was really scared. He asked me if I knew how to drive a car, and I said yes. And he said that I was about to be driving a Ferrari, the best car in the world. And he said, Doug, you don't need to know what's under the hood. Just drive it and have fun. And that really lit a bulb off in my head. So in the art department, we came up with imaginative interpretations of the scripts, and we developed 2D and 3D concepts. We quickly realized we would need a huge level of cross-departmental cooperation and collaboration. On Discovery, literally every department, we held hands and we dived in. We needed showrunners and writers and directors to come up with really cool and challenging ideas that would inspire us to make amazing things. We needed producers to create an environment of exploration and support and to embrace the idea that successes and failures would be learning opportunities. We needed everyone in every department on the show to be open to ideas and solutions that might or might not work. We really needed the spirit of play, and we did it. In the art department, we used old skills and we learned new ones to manifest our ideas into the visuals. We were very successful. We created whole planets on the wall that a director could block their actors in front of. The cinematographers could move their cameras around and frame things however they wanted without the green screen. It was really liberating for everyone. And because it was so big and so complicated, I realized that one of my roles as a production designer was to always maintain the vision of the showrunner, and when making creative decisions. With so many fingers in the pie on something like this, it can get very messy very fast, but it always worked out. And my big message at this point of the evening is this: don't be scared or intimidated by this tool. Embrace it, learn what it can do, be creative and expansive. The wall is big, it has depth and scope, and it allows for very powerful creative ideas to be expressed. Art departments do not have to hold back with their ideas. They can come up with the most impossible things you can think of. And on the wall, you will manifest these ideas into a reality that will blow your mind. And Matt will show you how cool all this is. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks, Doug. Okay, so since we are supposed to be focusing on the art department here, Matt, maybe let's start by talking about who all is involved in the prep and execution of a volume wall set, and more specifically, the makeup of the people in the art department, what additional people are needed, and how we set up a department on a show where a volume wall is being used.
For sure. I mean, like Doug said, it truly is a collaborative project with every department, but within the art department, it's not terribly different from a standard show. Designer, couple art directors, depending on how the designer wants to work with concept artists, but often 2D and definitely 3D concept artists, set designers, graphics, and more recently, concept artists with Connor skills, which would be an Unreal specialist that can kind of tie all of that traditional set design and concept work together in Unreal in a way to hand that off to VFX, which that sort of leads into another kind of tandem workflow to create the asset. So, the art department is responsible for designing the concept and the practical scenery, but at a certain point, that concept is handed off and VFX would take over. There's some, structure wise, the schedule and timing is a huge component of that. Because depending on the complexity of the asset or the type of, world we're building, which we can get into later when I show some examples. If it's a full CG environment, we're often building scenery that needs to be scanned and placed in the asset, or there's furniture that needs to be picked. So, the set deck department would start maybe earlier than a normal show, and construction and scenic as well. So we'll get into seeing a couple examples of some sets, but a large asset might be 12 to 16 weeks to build on a VFX side. So within that time frame, we'd be sourcing, drawing, building. And maybe Alex can speak to a little bit on the VFX side, the virtual art department.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on it quite well. The ask on the VFX side of things, since we've started working in virtual production, is that now we are building the same kind of VFX worlds that we normally would, but because we need them ready for the first day of shooting any episode, we now have to move that schedule way in advance, and that brings in the collaboration with our department to make sure that we meet their needs and they meet ours in terms of like Matt said, there's scanning pieces that need to be brought into our virtual environments, which means that they now need to have set elements and set pieces ready to go prior to shooting, and often by like 4 or 5 weeks prior to, which I know was also part of the learning curve for all of us in terms of how much in advance all these things need to be ready. And these guys obviously have the best knowledge of how that scheduling then shifted because of this new dynamic. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So what kinds of conversation, this is sort of a question for everybody. What kinds of conversations typically get you started with a volume wall?
We started with showrunners talking to me, and we would build up ideas, and sometimes we'd get early ideas, and then we'd sort of develop without a script or without even a story concept or anything, because like Matt was saying, it takes so long. So it would start with me talking to people, and then I would bring in, the art department, the art directors, the concept artists, and we would really dig into the script because it's so expensive and time consuming. We really only had to deal with what for sure was what they were trying to do. Like you couldn't be meandering around and making it bigger than you can't be making stuff they're not going to shoot. So we were very careful. We really would dig into the concepts of the script. That's how it starts for me, and then Matt can talk more about it, what the rest of it is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Start with script, and then what's truly feasible in the time we have, and an episodic budget of if we don't have, a script or the information and we're shooting something in 10 weeks, then it's like, okay, well, what's actually doable? And um, there are, we'll show some examples, a few different ways to use the wall. One is, the fully built environment, but it could also be used as kind of a playback asset. So it's not a built 3D element, but a video playback. So if you think of typical process shots with a car or a vehicle, or in Star Trek's case, a shuttle. Um,
Yeah, just and to touch on that too, and what Doug was saying as well. And one of the big things is that obviously the writers want these worlds to be huge and they want them to be expansive. And so one of the hard parts for Doug and Matt and the DPs, Phil, is trying to figure out sort of what area within those worlds kind of serve all masters in order to be able to come in on budget, come in on schedule, and hit all the script beats. And often there's the back and forth with the writers and with the executives and the directors to try and make sure that all of those kind of stars align along the way.
How have those expectations changed over time, Alex, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, um, I think that as we sort of started with all of these things, it was obviously a learning curve, and our expectations right off the bat were based on previous knowledge of, on our end, anyways, previous knowledge of Post and what it was going to take to build these assets virtually. And I'm sure it was similar with our department, but so kind of working backwards, we sort of had set like a, for us to build a massive environment for the end of a post full CG shot is going to take anywhere from 16 to 20 weeks potentially. And so that's sort of where we started with our scheduling wise and worked back from there. After all of these assets, we obviously got better and the technology's improved and Unreal has improved. So that helps bring those schedules down. But even still, I mean, I think the tightest we've done a turnaround for any of these virtual production assets is 10 weeks. Is sort of our bare minimum, and there's a lot of compromises that go along with that.
Okay, so that's getting a little bit into how your process changes when you're working with a volume wall. I guess there's a lot more that happens up front that would traditionally happen at the very end.
Yeah, exactly.
How does Doug, the design process change for you when you're working with a volume wall?
Well, it starts really early, and in our case, our showrunner was really quickly accepted the schedule. It sounds crazy, but it was really important that that the writers and the showrunner like get it because you can't really change stuff. So they would say, make a purple planet with green, stars or something, and we would develop that into an idea, and then they'd have like 2 weeks to kind of commit to the two-dimensional concept and say, yeah, that you're hitting it, and then we would move it and we would build it into a 3D concept, with people like Connor, and then we would totally involve Phil, and we start looking at it and say, this is what the showrunner is looking for. And, he would bring all this brilliant ideas about light and how to light this thing. Because not only is the wall a beautiful creative thing to look at, it also is a light source. And he was really clever in figuring out how to, and he grew with it too, like we all did, like figure out how to make the lighting, be really cool and interesting. So, and it's all that when we were doing all that, by the way, we did this whole thing. Season 4 was entirely in COVID. So we did this whole show on Zoom. So we would have these endless meetings where we'd be looking, like Connor would run it or somebody would run the thing, and we would look at it and we would talk about, put a tree there and put a light there and all that stuff. So it was like I said, the collaboration part of this is incredibly important to understanding. You cannot do it alone. You can't do it with just art department. You need, the lighting guys. And also, it's really important to talk for 1 second about the 3D part of it. So there's this great big huge horseshoe, and in the center is a real set that's built and painted and set dressed and have greens and everything. So that whole component is also a huge part of this. So you have to have these brilliant set designers who are really comfortable in all this technology also. And we had them. We had brilliant people doing all this stuff, and we had brilliant everybody all the way along the way. Because it's so complicated. But let's say you have a floor, you need to go into the matching, right? The matching is a big. I'm sure Phil will talk about that. You have to match the real set, and then you have to match it for what's in the wall. So, um, anyways, that's
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Doug, and everything affects everything else. So as Doug was saying, and we're watching these designs closely. Hopefully talking to the director at that point, trying to understand shots they may want to do. So all of that information is bouncing back and forth. If we're doing shafts from the ceiling, we may have to blow up panels. We've put light in the floor. That all has to be designed in, and everything you do inside has to be considered outside, and vice versa. So that's why it's so important that all of the teams work together.
And
And
Philip,
one
yeah,
note.
go ahead, Doug.
Sorry, Ron, sorry to interrupt. But it's really, if there's producers and production managers watching, it's really important to schedule this
Mm.
time that it takes, because that it's new, right? You have to really give a whole bunch of time to that part of it, what Phil's talking about. And again, we had to learn that, and we figured out how to schedule it. And we had Alex and stuff. So it was just, again, we figured it out, but it's a part of it. It's a really important part of it, the testing and the managing of it all.
I was learning too, Doug.
I know. Very supportive guide. We all wanted it to be amazing, right? So
Yeah.
that was why it worked. So
A question for Philip and a little bit for Alex as well. What tools do you guys use in the prep and shoot of a volume wall that are different from a traditional location or studio shoot?
There's a bunch of new kind of tools we use. The wall itself can be a light source. So we have instruments we call cards, which is basically you can make any shape on the wall, and we run that through a lighting programmer. Squares, circles, even pictures, and you can use those for reflections, light, or negative fill. So that's like a big one we use on the wall. Also, just being able to rotate the wall to cheat a background or to do a full 180 reverse. That's a tool we use quite often. Alex, can you think of any other major differences?
Well, I mean, I think for anyone who's sort of familiar with the process, the obvious ones are like light and weather constrictions, shooting out on location, within the volume, we can now do all these like sort of idealistic scenarios that normally you only have a couple minutes to capture on location, or you might have weather constrictions that's push your schedule around, those kind of things. All that can now be controlled in the volume, and that absolutely leads to getting your shot, but also having the time to really get in there and kind of find the best scenario for each.
Right.
Plus just the power to move a mountain or a sun or with a click and repaint parts of your image with, artists sitting behind a computer, and it's quite incredible that way. You have a lot of control. Once you're dialed and everything's kind of set up properly, as Doug was mentioning, it really is like being on an incredible real location with way more control.
Yeah, and one of the other nice parts too, kind of leading into sort of as we get into the prep and get closer to shooting, and Connor, I'm sure will touch on all this as well, is just having Unreal, basically the whole world in Unreal that you can then go in and zoom around, look at with the matching lenses for the DPs to see what the shots are going to be, and that he can show us what our restrictions are in terms of what's the top of the wall, where we're going to hit ceiling, all that kind of stuff. So that's been a huge helpful tool in the planning process of it as well.
Yeah. So Connor, I guess the position of Unreal Engine specialist is a pretty new role in the art department. Can you tell us a little bit about what Unreal Engine is, what you do, and what your process is when it comes to prepping a set design model for VFX handoff.
Sure. So Unreal Engine, that is the real-time rendering software developed by Epic Games. That's mostly been used to develop video games, interactive media, and eventually found its way into our film industry with the improvements in visual fidelity, all the real-time capabilities, and the tool set that Unreal brings, like camera tracking, into the volume stages where we can visualize all these virtual worlds. But it's not just the final output that we're using Unreal. It's throughout the entire development process. Like that starts in the art department as a previs tool that I can sit with the directors, DPs, and get a better understanding of the space inside that volume set. And usually we're doing like blocking meetings, so opening up the Unreal file, taking them through the space, all the accurate camera specs, lenses, and all the set pieces with accurate lighting, and popping in props, actors, just so they have a better sense of that space and they can explore and block out any camera angles that they want to seek and see what possible limitations could be on the set.
Doug, yeah.
I wanted to add something to what Connor's saying. Just so we would have one of our content would do a 2D thing, and then we had other artists who would take that 2D thing and put it into a 3D program, not yet Unreal, and then we would build it in conjunction with the showrunner and Phil and everybody. And then after, what we realized is because Pixo, the vendor that sort of makes it all real looking, was working in Unreal Engine, we decided we would hire an Unreal Engine specialist. So this Connor came, and our concept artist that worked in 3D would give him, this was the coolest thing of all, and they would give Connor this 3D thing in some program, and then he would take that program, whatever the program was, and he would take it and put it into Unreal. It was like mind-boggling. And then with Unreal, you can have all that tracking and moving around, and you can do. So it was an amazing addition to our crazy world that we had, the Unreal Engine component, plus a great artist like Connor is. So it was really a neat thing. And the directors and the DPs would sit around the desk in the art department with Connor, and he would fly around inside the model, and they would say, okay, I want to shoot that like that, and I would like that. And the AD would sit there and write it all down. And it was completely cool. It was because again, it's so time consuming and so much prep involved in all of this, but it's totally worth it in the end. But I just wanted to point out that that's what happened with Connor.
Absolutely. Thanks, Doug. Yeah, so it's a very, very helpful tool in that regard. So yeah, I'm working with the set designers and grabbing any assets that they've designed in software that they use. Usually it's in Rhino CAD software. And they're sending me all of the physical build set elements as well as anything virtual. And then I'm using any renders that they've provided or like physical material samples, and then develop the Unreal asset with all of that information, and as well as 2D concepts from the concept artists for further like atmosphere, mood, lighting. We can develop all that and then take the director around and iterate on those sets.
And one of the really nice parts about what Connor does for us as well is that he gives us the chance to so these guys have designed this set, they've designed the practical builds that they want to do, and we get to go in there prior to anyone lifting a hammer to actually build anything and see, okay, if this is here and our camera's back here, does it do what we need it to? Should it be taller? Should it be further back? All of those little things is just immensely invaluable because we really couldn't do it until the stuff's built on a regular set for the most part. So I think that has been such a useful tool as well, at least from our aspect.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's very cool.
And
Well,
one more note about this. So, for people that don't know, so let's say you were doing a planet and it had rocks on it, and then there was lots and lots of rocks, and then the rocks went forever. So, what was really interesting is we would make our painters would carve a rock, and they'd paint it and make it look beautiful. And let's say they made 20 rocks. So then someone like Alex or somebody would come in and film it. They do a LiDAR scan to make it a 3D photograph, and then someone like Connor would take these rocks and he would put them into the model, and then we would sit with him and we'd say, okay, move the rock over here and make it, we'll put five more back there. And so this three-dimensional digital rock that was this big, like in real life, we could make it massive or smaller, and it could give depth and scale and scope to this wall with, it would just go back and back farther and farther and farther. So we would literally would like we'd even could have the set dresser sitting there, like putting where the rocks seat, the set dresser or the set decorator would want to put his rocks. So it was, it's really like the adding the three-dimensional Unreal Engine part of this was mind-blowing for everybody.
and now Connor's nickname is Sisyphus, actually.
Rock pusher.
Hmm.
It should be
That sounds
noted
amazing.
that I think we should note that while we're looking around with Connor in Unreal, that there's always this kind of translucent representation of the wall. So we know what's outside the wall and what's inside the wall and how the two interact, and we can turn that on and off. So it's a big process as well because we know exactly what to design and light.
Yeah, I think Connor's going to show us what that looks like in his model a little bit later.
Right.
It's very cool.
We shall.
Matt, do you want to show us maybe some floor plans and we can start talking about some tips on designing practical scenery for the volume wall?
Yeah, I can run through some case studies of a few different uses of some sets we've done for Discovery. So this, I'll start with kind of the beginning concept art. This was for an alien desert planet with some in season 5 of Discovery. A great concept artist, Henry Fong, did these great 2D images. And this is an interesting case in that it's a scan of a location with some VFX augmentation. And then we had 3 hotspots, which is a term you'll hear a lot in virtual environments. So we had a set that was these Sandrunner tents out in the desert with the kind of city in the background. We had a set out in the desert with just 2 Sandrunners parked, and then we had a long action sequence, which was a process shot of these people riding these bikes through this desert. Alex actually scanned this location, which is a national park in Brazil, which maybe after I run through it, you can kind of talk to that.
Don't make me say the name.
It's really hard to.
I can't pronounce it.
We're lucky enough to go though.
Yeah.
So the first set that we built was this sort of market tent structure, and these are early views of the 3D environment being built. So we had some tents and these bike or Sandrunners. This was one view looking to the city and one view looking out to these mountains. And then we get into the actual stage. So this is the volume that is out in Brampton that Star Trek has been using. Just some specifics. It's 70 feet across, the width of the circle, and 80 feet deep. And then this is the large staging area, which is vital for any sort of set build on the wall for crew, staging, dressing. And getting into the actual set now. So we had 2 tents that were kind of permanent fixtures in the space, some rocks and bikes and things. And some general rules are you can't have your actors really closer than 10 feet. Some people will say 12 to 15 feet from the wall. So you've sort of got a middle playground to work with. And because the volume's open on this end, it's sort of a 3-walled set. And Phil mentioned, if you need to French reverse or look the other direction, one of the tricks is designing sets kind of on a mirrored axis. So across that plane, if you have your camera on this side looking in, if you rotate the world around these tents, the tents can live in the same place and you have to move minimal dressing. And then getting into the actual volume. So here you can see the set build, our ceiling, involved lighting setup that we've done. Phil could speak to that in a bit. And these are the camera trackers above the wall here, which are, allow for the asset to be tracked with the movement of the camera through the space.
Matt, do you try to keep practical scenery a certain distance away from the wall as well?
Yes and no. I mean, obviously the floor would go right up to the edge of the volume to help blend the real into the virtual space. Phil, do you want to speak to that as far as, moire and focusing and that sort of stuff with, depth to the wall?
Yeah, as to your question, you can build up to the wall. There's a fall off aspect, so things very close to the wall may appear a little bit brighter. We thought that'd be more of a problem than it actually is. So the floor actually falls off quite nicely. Moire and distance to the wall, it can be different on every lens. It's an equation of a grid on the wall and a grid on your sensor. When the two line up, it moires. So if you're on 100 mil focused on it, you could be 30 feet away and it'll moire. So, but generally we use the 15 foot rule, and that seems to work quite well. And generally it's not an issue. I think in a couple seasons I had a DIT tap me on the shoulder twice and say, hey, there's a bit of moire happening there. And it's an easy adjustment.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at, that sand, for instance, maybe you can correct me, Phil, but my memory is we spent a lot of time picking the sand and the color of the sand because it had to match the sand in the wall. And I think it was real sand, and our set decorators and greens people spent forever making sure that Phil was happy with the sand and the color of the sand, so that when he went to blend it all, it would look like this massive desert. So that was kind of interesting that we would have it all has to, and then he had to light it. He had to light the practical sand to look like the sand in the wall, so it was seamless. So
yeah, and it's not just the sand color, but it's sand plus wall light plus film lighting. So this is a rare set where we do hard sun, and because there's so much kind of set built in there, it hides the kind of multiple shadows of multiple hard lights. And so, wall light and physical light are two different colors, plus the sand is a specific color. So we had to kind of do all our tests under those environments, and then we could do the last kind of 10% matching, on the day kind of thing, or in the pre-light.
And just going back to something Matt had said earlier about the term hotspots. One thing that we wind up doing is trying to, like we were saying before, trying to figure out where we want those positions to be. We consider a hotspot to be any area that we are going to build our physical stage within the 3D environment, but also that means that we then detail all the virtual environment that much higher resolution in those areas. Otherwise, you would think, well, you're building a 3D environment, so you could just move over 20 feet into the desert if you wanted to, or go over that hill. But what winds up happening is you get a little bit further out, and then certain aspects within the actual virtual build start to fall apart because it's not built like a regular video game. There's traditional VFX techniques, layering 2D cards in the background. You can build 3D environments like a video game, but we are restricted by the processing power of the actual wall itself is something that we're constantly battling. Because these environments become massive, we wind up having to optimize them down, and we call it baking the light down. So essentially light that's on certain surfaces, if it's not going to change in the scene, we wind up basically painting it right onto the surface so that it's not eating up processing power within the wall itself as the camera tracks around. And then another thing I just wanted to point out too was one of the design aspects of the volume itself is that we're on a 2 foot high platform, which I know Doug, I believe that was you guys that designed that, and it's brilliant because it allows for different special effects, different lighting, different aspects to be run. I kind of dug into the floor itself so that we can have sources hidden within our practical volume and not have to hide the hoses, not have to hide the wiring. But it does mean that there's a 2 foot gap at the edge where it just falls off into basically a moat around the actual practical stage. And that's where we get into the blend aspect of everything. And I know we'll talk about that in a little bit, but just give some clarity.
And having layers and layers of practical scenery kind of helps you with that, right? Helps you
Absolutely. Yeah,
disappear that line.
exactly.
Alex, one thing that's really apparent in this image is there's a difference between the ceiling panels and the wall panels. So when you're shooting in the volume, you know, people may have seen other images where there's a full image on the ceiling. Can you speak to the post VFX that's still needed
Yeah. So
on a shot like this?
for sure, I think one of the challenges that we sort of always run into is because it's such a big volume, we always want to use as much of the depth and space as possible. And so as we start to bring our camera further back, we start to reveal the top of the actual wall at the background. And that's what you can see there, that ring of lights. And then you can see the transition to a practical or to a different ceiling. Now the ceiling is, it's also LED panels, but it's actually a lower resolution than the walls. And so what winds up happening is even if we see that ceiling in the shot, it starts to have more grain and more distortions on it because of the lower resolution. It's really there for lighting and reflections more than anything, because we wind up having to replace the wall and the ceiling when we actually see it. So that still takes us into a VFX shot that will need post work. So we do try and plan everything so that we can stay kind of within our wall range as much as possible.
Oh,
Phil's worst nightmare.
yeah. So another set we did in this environment was out in the desert. So we had, you know, taken the tents down, and this was a kind of a one-off scene where a 3-walled set was fine.
Alex, have you ever worked on a wall where you've had portable LED walls just to cover that open mouth? So you're kind of fully.
Not for, I know that it exists. We haven't done it on Star Trek. I know that we've done lots of different solutions. I'm sure Matt can speak to and Doug can speak to of in terms of having flattage or, you know, set dressing or different pieces that help get us out into the volume a bit and block that horseshoe so that we've got more of a 360-degree set. But yes, you can have basically portable LED walls that could fly in. They would still require lineup and tracking and all that kind of stuff, but there are options available for those things.
Deanna, should I jump ahead to another case study to show an example of that? Or
Yeah, sure.
so this is a set we did for the Section 31 film movie, which was kind of a space station hotel lounge. A little bit of the process started with a very rough kind of 3D model just to, you know, get the kind of the mechanics of the set space working. And even as that was approved, kind of developed the look with 2D concepts. Henry again was working on this, and then breaking this down into what would be built for the wall. So here's a different shaped wall that we sort of altered for this. What started as a half circle between here. We added these straight and curved sections to make the volume deeper, and then we built this large kind of bar, VIP area and lounge to close the wall. So we had a full 360-degree set to shoot inside. This was with Paul Kirby was the production designer on this. Early sort of massing studies about, this is the set build in the wall, looking backwards at this is the actual build to close the volume off. And then as this is happening, we move into 3D, more into 3D, and there's a lot of work in tandem happening. So we have set designers working on the built elements, these booths, the bar, and then other 3D concept artists. This was Joe Schutte-Cartier was working on the sort of 3D elements in the asset to go along with the physical build. And we start looking at what's practical, what's in the wall.
And actually, Matt, just in that last slide, yeah, that one. So on the left-hand side there's those kind of big arches and pillars. So that was a good example of something that was built practically that was then also we do a 3D LiDAR scan of them, and then once they're completed, and put that into the virtual as well, and match as best we can lighting and reflections and all the different patinas on them. So just as an example of
and that similarly with the booths that we built were all scanned and put deeper into the asset, and the tables and chairs and lamps and lighting. So SetTech, all of this stuff was selected quite early and scanned.
And how long does that blending process take? How many times do you guys go in and look and tweak?
Well, I'll jump ahead. So the first sort of preview, so there was the finished floor plan. And here's probably the first preview day was a work in progress view of the asset with no set yet. We're still building the physical scenery. And I think we had 3 previews typically, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, as many as we can normally get is our ideal. If we can get in there 3 times, I would say is the minimum, and as far in advance as possible. Each time reveals a different aspect of, usually our reviews are like 2 to 3 weeks apart and reveals new kind of details of lighting or how we're going to shoot it or what the space sort of feels like. So whenever we can get in there to review on the actual stage, which is hard to do because you need a camera and crew, you need everybody to be available, especially if it's well in advance of an episode or in this case, the actual shooting of the movie. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges involved, but as much as possible, we want to see it in situ.
And Philip, can you talk a little bit about pre-lighting a volume wall set?
Yeah, it as Alex mentioned, it really kind of works when it's through the camera. In fact, a lot of these pictures, the perspective will be off because the tracker's not on it. So as Alex mentioned, pre-lighting needs to be done through the camera. All our reviews are done through the camera, and again, it's kind of a back and forth. So, I'll bring in some light that a certain area needs to light some faces. That'll affect the floor, and Pixo and the brain bar will be watching that through the camera and be painting in real time as we are moving. And maybe they'll ask to put the crane up in the corner for a minute to get a kind of overview of it, and I'm watching what they're doing, and I'm making sure not to light the floor too close to the wall so that it's not affecting them. And it's a real back and forth. But typically, we get a tech rehearsal day where we try and go through every single shot, and we get a pre-light day as well, a pre-light day before the tech rehearsal. And that's kind of the time we get to do that, and then shot by shot we're updating and painting the floor and updating the blend as we go.
Yeah, and with that blending process as well, we try and do it a couple days in advance of actually shooting as well, so that our whoever in this case Pixo, who's running the wall, they have a chance to react to the blend day, so that they can optimize and bake down any lights that they need to, so that because we rely on the wall itself to be running at least 24 frames per second. And so if there's any issues with performance, we'll get stutters on the actual playback on the day, and that means that shot instantly becomes a VFX replacement, and we've just spent thousands of dollars when we were hoping to be all in camera.
So during that blend, there generally I have to choose which lights I want to be dynamic. So, I need the sun's brightness to change, and I need in this example, the lamps in the background on the tables. I know I'm going to be adjusting mine, so I'll need to adjust those. I'll say I need those dynamic. And then, I choose 2 or 3 things that can be dynamic. Usually it's enough. And then they bake everything else. They kind of take a picture of it, as Alex said, bake it down, and it runs a lot cleaner that way.
Yeah.
Mm.
We had a luxury of this wall, like Matt was saying, was built a few years newer than the one we use for Discovery and for Strange New Worlds. And so it had a much higher performance and allowed for more moving lights, more elements that could be added to the actual background, and still be performant on the day.
Connor, do you have any practical tips for designing a 3D environment for the volume wall? Maybe you can show us your model of this specific set while we're on it.
Absolutely. Let me bring up the screen there. Okay, you can all see that now.
Mm-hmm.
Ready? Just take you into that volume. When it comes to practical tips, I can definitely speak to the starting process of developing the assets. I don't go as far as in the handoff to VFX, where they have to optimize it in a way that it has to perform on the volume stage. But I do have a process that we've kind of figured out with VFX when we're handing over the files, just in terms of organizing everything in a certain way, simplifying some of the complex models, and using little cheats here and there, like using 2D cards for certain lights. I'm usually optimizing this in the sense when we're doing our blocking meetings, just to make sure everything in the model is running smooth.
Okay. Yeah, show us more.
There we go. So here is a digital version of the physical build on our Unreal set. Just take you through the space there. Then the full thing. There we go. All right. I'll just kind of fly around as if we're doing a little blocking session right now. So let me get the people in there. All right.
So this model has obviously some moving elements that are in the wall. Does that complicate things, slow things down?
Alex, do you want to speak to the digidoubles and the process of so the performance required and the process of capturing them?
Sure. So yeah, for this set in particular, what we wound up doing was actually for a lot of the sets where we need to see background performers in the virtual set as well as the practical, we'll do a blue screen element shoot where we'll bring in a handful of background actors, get them into costume, makeup, prosthetics, what have you. And then we will shoot different, basically 10-second clips of them on blue screen doing different interactions. And if you get really, like, if you really dove into who's dressed around here, they are repeated with slight variations throughout, and a lot of them, Connor can probably show you, like these guys in the foreground here are 2D cards. So as he starts to move around, literally, that's all you get. So they're dressed to the perspective of the center of the stage as needed once they get in. And so the reason we do that instead of digidoubles is because those little sort of cards, those sequences are way more performant. They don't need nearly as much processing power for the wall. And so we can dress in hundreds essentially. But in this case, because we were using a newer wall with higher performance, we actually were able to use digidoubles, which are actual CG creatures within the virtual stage as well. And that's why you could see some of the guys sitting there, some of the creatures sitting on the inside of the actual virtual stage were moving around and had 3 dimensions to them. With our wall, with our Discovery and Strange New Worlds wall, we don't have that luxury, unfortunately, just because it is an older wall, and so we do rely heavily on blue screen elements, basically cards, 2D cards to dress in. But it does mean practically capturing those at least 4 weeks in advance of shooting, which can obviously be a challenge for props, prosthetics, makeup, and costumes to be ready in time.
And Phil, what's your process working with someone like Connor when you have a model like this? How does this help or influence that process?
Yeah, so I'm when I'm working with Connor, I'm really taking into consider the physical space. So, if you shut everything off and it was just a black studio, that would be your area. So I can't put a light, 200 feet away. It's all got to be within this wall. And understanding how the panels go together, you can remove panels, but it's a bit of a process. There's a grid up there that we can hang lights from. I'm looking at where my actors are and how we're going to cover the scene and how light is going to affect them there. And I'm also looking at does the trick work? What are the best backgrounds? What are different lenses going to look like? Where am I going to get nice depth and find areas that are elongated that once you build the trick, your eye goes straight through the wall and it just becomes seamless through camera. So I'm just trying to find those angles that really kind of sing.
And just sorry, just building on what Phil was just saying in terms of when he's building these, actually when all of us are building these, one of the things that we can't do with the wall in its current state is have hard light come from the panels. It outputs a soft light, and so things like direct sunlight or spotlights are challenging, and that's where, like Phil was saying, we need the overhead lighting, or we can remove panels and do things like a sun or a spotlight through a panel. The issue being that once the camera starts moving, the whole wall is tracking with the camera, And so that sun that was at the north end of the volume now all of a sudden tracks 30 degrees left or right. And therefore now you've got a very clear studio light in your scene that would require painting out. So there are lots of those little dynamic tricks that we've developed over the years, and Phil's been a pioneer of a lot of that. But there are definitely challenges with lighting the wall practically versus virtually.
Right. And to that point, what else can you not do in a volume wall? Is there anything that's particularly tricky?
Don't fall in the moat. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of stuff. We're restricted based on the panels and the original build in terms, like Phil was saying before, we can't get too close to the wall without it revealing itself as an LED panel and getting moire. There's also, the special effects side of things, rain, any kind of water on the actual panels, that kind of thing is always tricky or to be avoided. I know that there are stages that are built with waterproof panels or water resistant panels to try and compensate for some of that. What else?
What about animation?
Oh yeah.
Animating
Yes. So
3D?
that's a great point. For us in particular, one of the hard parts is triggering animation, but also having timed elements within the wall itself. And so if there's a story beat that requires something that would normally be a VFX element, we wind up typically doing like adding into the budget a VFX shot so that we can accomplish that. Because it could be too expensive or time permitting on the front end to be able to, build a ship that's going to come in and crash into the desert in the background. But also when we actually go to shoot on these walls, because of that pixel pitch aspect of why we get moire and why you can't be too close to the panels themselves, you wind up it restricts our ability to actually focus on the wall itself. So you can't essentially do someone's POV into the wall.
Mhm.
And so with these hero shots where you want to see something, like a ship crash, you wind up doing that as a VFX shot. And we might do elements that are foregroundy or like over the shoulders or those kind of things to help us build that more naturally. But for the most part, those stay in the visual effects side.
I would also add that for Discovery, it was a 3-camera show. And typically in here you want to keep it to 2 cameras, and even then it comes with caveats. We say you don't want to cross the stream, so they can't share the same background. They each have their own background that move independently for each camera. So that's a consideration time-wise. Now that's going from a 3 to a 2-camera show. If you're a 1-camera show, it gets a little more efficient that way. But typically we're budgeting a bit more time for these scenes, especially, if you have, 7, 8, 9 people in a scene, you can start to slow down going to 1 camera pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to say, from the perspective of a production designer, and working with the showrunner again, if the spaceship has to crash in the desert, we didn't look at it as a limitation of the wall. We just knew that in the story, this had to happen, and we would plan for the visuals in the wall to accommodate something like that. But it was not viewed as something it couldn't do, because it didn't matter, because in the big picture, we always knew that Alex and his friends were going to come in and put the spaceship in and everything. So I just wanted to emphasize it's not a negative thing what it can't do, because we just passed it over to post.
I was always nervous, Doug.
He didn't look nervous.
Okay, that's great. Shifting gears a little bit, I'd love to talk about shooting and playing back footage. on the wall versus what we're seeing here, which is a fully built 3D environment. I think, Matt, we have a case study for that as well, right?
Sick.
One little note while he's setting up. The wall really only works, and Phil taught me this. You have to be looking through the lens.
Totally.
If you're standing there, it's cool and everything. But what you have to do is stand by the chairs and look at the TVs, because that's where you really see the magic. So when you're just physically standing in the space like these people are, it's cool, but it isn't what it's going to look like, if that makes sense.
There's a trick though that you can ask Pixel. They'll give you a little tracking unit, and you can put that on your head and walk around in it. It updates it for your eyeballs, not just the camera.
So here's another use of the wall, which is like a process shot, traveling, or this could be a car or van or a shuttle at warp. So here's the shuttle in the center of the volume, and for this setup, it actually played as 3 different playback assets. So it was also crashed on an ice planet, but starting at warp, this was just a playback video loop. Correct me if I'm wrong, Alex.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
For the animation of it going through the atmosphere toward the planet, we needed to switch it to green, because that was not either, I think, time-wise to create that asset we didn't have.
Yeah. Yeah, specific story beats, exactly.
And then we are now crashed on the planet, and this is actually a 360 photograph.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was a photo that was used, and then you guys added, I think that was your top-down plan had,
Yes.
or that photo up above has the rocks. They added some mid-ground rocks, and then special effects complemented that with steam coming off the edges of the shuttle, and all those little aspects help layer in and kind of take us out of a translite situation and into the depth that you then get parallax outside the actual windows. The interesting thing about warp for the shuttle, and this sort of goes for kind of most of the space travel, or if you were in a plane or a car or whatever, the thing that makes the playback aspect work is obviously not having any relative scale that we know about. And so we're not seeing the ground, we're not seeing like the physical stage. And so that's what helps us just believe that it's all flying past and we're in that 3D space.
And the turnaround time for a playback asset is significantly quicker than a fully built out virtual space with tracking, correct?
Yes and no. I mean, yeah, I mean, definitely yes, for there's less aspects in terms of the set build and the tracking and all that kind of stuff. But with the playback, you're still winding up rendering out, I want to say it's a 16 or a 20K video element. And it's all, again, we still review them all prior to, because with the wall and the shape of the wall, it's no longer just a flat screen. So you have to kind of keep that perspective in mind, as well as one of the things too that we had to learn was, because our vendors that were building these were so used to building them for visual effects, we wound up having little pieces, all of those sort of little post filters on, like a little bit of chromatic aberration or some motion blur around the edges, vignetting, all that kind of stuff. And we wound up having to take all that off because you want to add that again through your lens. So you really need the clean view prior to. So that was a little bit of a current learning curve for us as well.
Another example is could be a motorcycle or snowmobile or sand runner.
Yeah.
And this was working very closely with the special effects department on a 5-axis. So the vehicle was mounted to a 5-axis gimbal, which was then tied to code in Unreal to track the video file. As the path went through this desert, it was tied to the platform moving for the rider. which was a lot of R&D.
That was all built in Unreal as well, actually.
Yeah.
That was not playback. You could do this one playback as well, but it was built in Unreal. It worked really well.
And what's the benefit of doing something like this in the volume wall versus on green screen or even on location?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the like questions. That's probably the most common question I get, especially from, producers and executives or writers, is why bother doing this versus location or green screen? And aside from the lighting and weather limitations, there's the money aspect of, often they say, is it cheaper? And the answer is no, it's not cheaper. However, you get more production value out of it. So typically, if you had a set and there's a green screen extension on one side of it, what winds up happening is you're restricted to your budget in terms of how many times you look that direction. You say it's going to cost X amount of dollars, and every time you look at it, every cut, it's that amount of dollars adding up. And that adds up very quickly, especially if you get into a scene that has a page or two of dialogue. Now, all of a sudden, if you're surrounded in green screen, you've paid for the amount of the initial volume. And so then you can shoot it as many times as you want, as many cuts as you want, all these different angles. And that's what provides the production value. So not cheaper, but you get more out of it.
And also, it's liberating, kind of, right? Because you have
Absolutely.
directors and the DPs can kind of do anything they want. And they make it up on they even slightly change things. And this thing that you're looking at, that woman sitting on, is an entirely constructed object from the set dressing, and didn't really work, right? But when we shot it, and the cleverness of Phil and Alex making it all look like it really is moving across the desert, so it's you'd have to, if you wanted to do this practically on a desert, I guess you have to go to the desert, you have to make that thing work, and so there's a lot of other added components to it too, right? So.
And Phil, yeah, you're absolutely right. I wrote it though, Doug. I wrote on there, it's definitely real. It worked. Phil, you should also just mention how you did the lighting for this, because it was pretty cool as well.
Yeah, you can see the multiple park hands in a couple of shots, and I used the same lighting setup for this and the tent set. So because it was a kind of a quick turnover, so I just did one lighting setup in the ceiling that worked for multiple sets and multiple sun directions. So as this gimbal turned, its relativity to the sun changed. So those park hands, we had kind of a snake of light that would travel, with Michael Burnham, as she churned. So it would churn from a side light to a backlight as the Sandrunner turned around. So that was quite fun, and that was all tapped into Unreal as well and tracked to the virtual sun and its position. I would also add the benefit of virtual production versus green screen. I find is what we were talking about earlier, is just the collaboration between all these departments. We had to, but it actually became very nice to be able to do reviews and really think about the backgrounds, where I find in a green screen world, it's a little bit of, well, it might be like this or it might be like that. And so we tend to light a little more flat, just to kind of let the relighting happen earlier, where you can get a little bit more of a cohesive idea when it's actually something everybody's looking at in the same room and able to make adjustments to.
Not to mention that it helps the actors understand their environment as well, right?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting close to our time here, but I just wanted to quickly talk a little bit about sustainability when it comes to these walls. How do I know this is a big conversation, lots of opinions about this, but how do we feel generally? Is this a greener solution or not?
I think that's a tricky question, but
Yeah.
it allows us to do things that we could never build. So, we're building typically smaller physical sets in the volume and getting a massive world out of it. Whereas if you had to build some of those sets, it would be millions and millions and millions of dollars and time and materials to do it. So that's, from my perspective, that's one huge benefit. Uh, and for location wise, you're not moving a unit all around the world to capture a national park in Brazil or
And stomping hundreds of people on top of that,
For
sorry.
generators and power, typically about the same amount of power as the same size set as you would build, which these are massive sets. I don't know if we would actually do 10 huge locations on a show like this and build them all out, so we're using this technology to give the show more scope and scale. So we are building more, as Matt's kind of saying, we're building more inside, but outside you're getting all that for free. None of that's lumber, none of that's plastic. It's just ones and zeros out there. So in that sense, it does save.
Okay. Interesting. Food for thought. On that note, I think I'll hand it over to Marianne for Q&A.
Well, I'll just read them out and you guys in your lovely faces and with pictures can answer them. So thanks so much. That was really fantastic listening to all that. And again, if you have more pictures to show, I'm sure some of your questions here might request that. So first question is from Teresa Ho. Does the timeline make a difference when you are trying to emulate reality versus fantasy set sequences? So I guess that the question for anyone who wants to answer that.
Well, the one set that Matt showed, that was the photograph of the quarry in Newmarket that became a planet. That maybe Alex can speak to that, but someone went out there and did a really big photograph, I guess like a LiDAR. Yeah, Alex. So he maybe can speak to that, but that would be significantly less time, Teresa, versus making one of the planets, So, but
Yeah, no, I want to agree with you. Like that, obviously, that is a good example of the backdrop for that was a 360-degree photo off of a drone, which we really didn't alter. There was a little bit of paint out here and there, but for the most part, it worked outside of our shuttle windows. The one thing being that particular environment, because we built it as that 360-degree photo, it didn't have tracking. So once we're inside the shuttle, we typically don't have tracking on the wall, and that's why it sort of works because we don't see that the exterior floor is there, unless the exterior floor is meant to be there. And then the other part of your question, I think, was emulating reality versus fantasy in terms of if we can start from real objects, real rocks, surfaces, all that kind of stuff. Those are much easier, and a lot of that exists already within the 3D world that we can start building quicker than bespoke fantasy elements, for sure.
I used to I worked on a show a long time ago, like 20 years ago, that had a rooftop set and it had a great big translate of a Chicago around it. And I often thought, it'd be very cool if a TV show had a permanent roof set like we had on that show and have, this great big 3D drone photograph of Chicago. I think it would be really cool. And you could have done, I don't know, maybe Phil can speak to this. At the time, you couldn't do daytime because they couldn't get the lights far enough from the stage to make it look like sunlight. So we only did nighttime up there. So I thought, I don't know, maybe if you could do daytime rooftop, if you were doing a TV show with 13 episodes or something, and you needed a scene every week up there, whether you could do day and night. I mean, that would be an application in real life. It might not be hugely expensive, but I don't know.
Yeah, lighting that would be a challenge for day because you need ground row and above, where it's much easier to backlight in that scenario. And that's the beautiful thing about these panels is they are backlit, so they don't take extra space or anything to light from or to.
And the nice part, Sorry. Oh, I was just gonna add to what Doug was saying too, is one of the nicest parts about the wall is that if you can create an Amort set that is across multiple episodes, you can shoot all of those together to help your schedule as well, which is nice, instead of having to go out to multiple locations.
Hopefully that gave some breadth of to that answer. Thanks, guys. A question from Sandrine Pichel de Saint-Sardo. Question for Connor. What's your background and what did you study and where? Thank you.
Background. So I graduated from Sheridan College in 2021 through the illustration program, where I kind of developed more into concept illustration. And along the way of joining the DGC, I was learning all these programs, and Unreal was one of them. And yeah, I just kind of took my own time to practice with Unreal as much as I could, and then eventually ran into Mr. Matt Morgan there and started our Star Trek journey. And it was very interesting because as I'm learning something that's new to me, it's new to everybody in the art department. So yeah, we were all learning together.
Sort of along the same line as a question from Ishan Gupta. For someone with 3D experience and some working knowledge of Unreal and basic set design experience, what kind of portfolio of personal work should I have for a volume stage work?
For that, I can speak to that. I guess before I got into film industry, I guess creating that personal portfolio was just kind of practicing anything that would actually happen on a set. So spend time developing concepts for a stage and try to see how you could develop something where you can show that something's going to be shot, physically built, and then extend that into an AR asset, and just kind of practice, play around with the program, learn all the ins and outs and workflows that benefit virtual production.
As a designer, if I was interviewing someone and looking for a Connor, I definitely want to see some examples of a real, an Unreal Engine model. And also, it was really fantastic, the art department at Discovery, because we all had a sense of camaraderie. We helped each other. It was definitely a learning curve for everybody, and we just helped everybody. 2D people helped 3D people, 3D people helped 2D people, then Connor came along with the Unreal Engine, which put it all together. And it was the spirit of collaboration and joy and play and being clever and interesting. And those are the things that we would look for in that person. And, it's making sure you can show what you can do and what kind of person you are.
I would make a reel, Ashan, if you can. If it's Unreal, like 2D or renders of your 3D projects, but making video files, if you're sending it out to someone that they can look at, then they can see sort of how fluent you are. That would be my suggestion.
Thanks, guys. Question from Michelle Liberté, where it sort of was answered in the course of your presentation. Were sand and dust problematic with the LED walls?
Sometimes. We actually, for the desert sets or sand sets, we use a specific type of sand that's like a play sand that's very low dust. That doesn't mean it doesn't go everywhere, but it doesn't.
And didn't we test it endlessly?
Yeah.
I think we still wound up having to bring out cleaning crews to vacuum the wall after.
Yeah. Big Swiffers too on the day.
Yeah.
Love the cleaners.
Thanks for that question.
I will say though that the sand is one of the best things to be able to blend the environments because there's natural breakup and natural texture. That's the kind of stuff that we need for those blends. Otherwise, they really pop out. If it's and going back to one of Tiana's questions was, what shouldn't we do? Is reflective floors that go right to the volume or right to the wall.
I love reflective floors.
I love reflective floors. Um, Doug's saying that because I jump all over them whenever they're reflective. What winds up happening is because the surfaces are only a few feet apart, you wind up getting the wrong reflection on the floor, um, and it's based on where the camera is. So things that shouldn't reflect on the floor do. And when we're trying to blend those two things, it's almost impossible to get the same light source on the virtual that's hitting, just because of the way that the actual surfaces are. It's very, very, very challenging to blend a smooth, flat, reflective floor.
As Tunde would say, is it challenging but not impossible, right?
Hmm.
It's a challenging and a VFX cost after. Let's put it that way.
Somewhat related to this, and it was also talked about in your presentation.
Oh,
This is an anonymous question. Does it help to raise the floor so it fades into the volume? So maybe you can talk a bit more about that.
yeah. I mean, that's what I was bringing up about the platform being raised, how it helps us with special effects and everything like that, but it also helps us with our blend because it gives us a little bit of drop off, so that we can hide our virtual layer sort of just under the edge of the practical. But it also oh, sorry, go ahead, Doug.
No, all I was going to say was my memory of that is also we knew we were going to need a lot of electricity. So we had to have this this cavity to put
Yeah.
the extension cords, through the hole and everything. So it was my memory too is we were constantly fixing the floor, like to make a hole to working with the electrics. We had to have it couldn't have been all over the floor, like the wires and stuff. So that was one of the reasons we elevated it.
Yeah, and to that point too, I think because of that, we wound up raising the actual panels off the floor a little bit to be able to pass wires under the actual panels.
Didn't we want to screw into it too, like with a wooden
Yeah,
top? So we wanted to
yeah,
put set dressing and screw it down and stuff. So
right.
Also, getting the floor away from the walls eliminates that first kind of 2-3 feet of fall off. So the wall would be very bright at the floor. So it helps with the blend a lot as well.
And allows you for higher camera positions, so you're not seeing the bottom of the wall.
Yeah.
Thanks. David Laramie has a question. I have heard, I believe, of issues with high def rendering, frustum in brackets, not rendering properly due to foliage, actors, set pieces, and due to the references being obscured, preventing tracking.
Yeah. So when we're using frustrums, which essentially is an isolated box on the actual wall that is rendered for each individual camera. It helps with our tracking, but it also what happens is we wind up doing high definition on the actual piece that the camera's seeing, and sort of the edges of the box are just sort of a little bit beyond the edge of what the camera sees, and everything else on the wall turns into a low res image when we're not seeing it. So you do wind up, there are certain times when quick camera movements, whip pans, those kind of things can reveal the frustum not being able to catch up to it in time. There's also foliage and actor set pieces. Those kind of things are you can sometimes get aliasing around behind certain foliage just because you get little reflections on the edges of the leaves, and you actually wind up seeing the pixels between the actual panels themselves, and so that can sometimes reveal issues when we're in the frustrums like that.
That's why it's so important to do the tech rehearsal, and we try and do as many shots as we're actually going to do on the day with stand-ins, and most of those issues can be revealed. Although I don't find it too often.
Yeah, more on the virtual side, like in terms of foliage in the virtual world, or like really fine detail, if it can sometimes get lost between the actual pixels on the panels themselves.
An alias and step. And
Little buzz.
those things are easy to kind of like select and just turn off in Unreal as well. And
Right. Yeah. Lots of solutions that we've
Yeah.
learned over the years.
Thanks. Teresa Ho has another question. After you build the sets, do they get rolled in, or are you building them in the volume? And how much time do you allot to the building of the sets within the volume?
I'll answer that. It really depends on the set. Some of them are fully built and rolled in, like that shuttle will assemble on the staging area and roll it in. Other larger installs would happen all in place, but typically built in kind of modular units. So the install period can be relatively quick because sort of the episodic schedule requires, maximum, I think we'd have typically 3 weeks to install a set, and that's kind of long. And that has to include the installation of the set, the tech rehearsals, the blend days, and then the bake of the asset. So that's 3 to 4 days lost before we shoot it for rehearsing. So a lot of the stuff is well planned and orchestrated with all departments, grips, lighting, set deck, construction, to kind of work on top of each other to get things done within a typically 2 week period, 2 to 3 week period for a big set.
It's
And if
really
you're ever,
it's a lot of
Go ahead.
scheduling, Teresa. You have to really plan, like, okay, you guys get 3 hours and you guys get 3 hours and you get, because also we were also fighting with Strange New Worlds because they were using the wall at the same time. So we were coordinating, somebody was masterminding this whole thing, but we were coordinating with them as well too. So they had to get out of there like wrap, and we would draft. Like, so there was it was 24-hour, 7 day away, day a week, loading in, loading out, rolling in, rolling out, like.
Shout out to Matt Middleton and Ann Van Couverden if they're on here for they've been instrumental in scheduling a lot of this stuff.
Mhm.
We used to have Zoom calls with Strange New Worlds Discovery because they were also learning like we were learning. So again, lots of collaboration, lots of coordination.
2 tracking questions. Trina Renee says, I've had issues in the past. What kind of tracking system was used at this stage? I guess they mean the stage that you were showing. And then another question on the heels of that one. How does the tracking of the camera work?
We've had issues with tracking too, so don't fret.
Yeah. There's no perfect solution. For us, and Phil, you can jump in at any point, but for us, we use an OptiTrack system. It's all line of sight, just because it gives us the least margin of error. I know that there are inertial trackers and infrared and all that kind of stuff that are options. Yeah, this stage itself uses an OptiTrack line of sight system, which is pretty good, but there are obviously lots of different scenarios where tracking jumps or something gets in the way. Yeah.
Yeah, like you say, everything has its pros and cons. I think one of the decisions for us for OptiTrack is we knew we were going to roll the camera a lot, and a lot of the infrared systems would not work that way. Infrared systems or inside out tracking means your tracking camera's on the actual camera and it's looking at little infrared dots in the sky, and that can give you a more seamless roof. Because our ceiling was a different panel anyway, it wasn't the thing we were trying to do.
David Laramie has another question. I'm not quite sure. Does any post work mandate using motion control? Maybe you guys can parse that out. Does any post work mandate using motion control? Does that make?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I guess that's me. Yes. Yeah, we do. We do use motion control. There's been a bunch of scenarios where we'll use it, multiple actors, crowd replication. I don't know that we've used it did we use it in the volume? Not that I can think of.
Yeah.
I think we sort of shy away from it quite often just based on the amount of shots that we're trying to get through in a day, scheduling wise, and then cost of renting the equipment. We would like to use it more. VFX always likes motion control.
Mhm.
Jan Adgist asked, how much time in post-production do you save with the wall?
I got to be honest, I don't think you save any. I think it's probably not true. I'm sure there's both sides to the argument. You wind up doing a lot of your legwork for your asset builds and everything prior to shooting so that you can shoot it all in camera. But you know, 9 out of 10 sets, you still wind up with a wide shot or an establisher that is a CG takeover, or you're coming in off the ceiling and the whole thing needs replacing. And so you're building in post as well. Yeah, you really don't. Sorry, go ahead, Doug.
I was going to say was one thing I remember directors talked a little bit about this because they have they when you do stuff the way that we do it on these kind of shows, there's so much people, there's like army of people to do things. And so when in post, like we're all gone, right? You're only dealing with the post people and maybe like a vendor or whatever, but you have the resources of an entire massive art department and set decorators and everybody. So so there's so much involvement possible because in post there's no army except for whatever Alex's army is.
Oh,
So
we have an army. We have a big army.
we have access to me, the showrunner, the director, the writer. Like it's just this whole thing. So you get all that you don't get. So
Yeah. And going back to the like collaboration of it all, right? We've got all these people that have expert eyes in their respective fields, and so they can now offer, these things that help make it what we're intending in the first place. And to be able to see it while we're shooting it helps the actors. I think it helps everyone, really.
Frank Gentili, have you ever integrated snow or rain in the foreground?
Matt and I are both nodding yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do it on sort of isolated scenarios because the wall is not waterproof and very electric. We just, like you say, keep it. The special effects team keeps it foreground. We've added virtual rain or snow to sort of match. And then again, you do wind up with a couple of VFX shots where we add it later just for continuity's sake. Matt, were you gonna add?
Yeah, no, yeah, I was gonna say the same. I mean, special effects can do water and snow on smaller scale things. Like we can build a pool, and as long as everything's very contained, we can do it safely, and it's not a problem.
Fahad Khan, was there something else you wanted to say?
No, we've done bubbles and dust and floaties in the air.
Yeah.
That actually all helps to the illusion. It gives you more parallax and perspective on things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the more practical effects you use, I mean, within reason, really help sell the experience.
Yeah, exactly.
one thing we haven't really touched too much on in this, and it's related to what you're talking about, is the importance of the old world. Carpenters, painters, sculptors, set decorators, props people, like special effects people, like their contribution to this is as big as everybody else's here. And it's they come up with solutions just like they always do on every show that enhances everything else well. So they're very, very important. And the regular set designers who are doing hard, like the real life sets that are being built, like the contributions from that whole world is still super important. And we value all those skills and talents. So
Great. Fahad Khan asks, once assets are ported into Unreal for the volume, can the actual model be significantly altered outside of basic manipulation, such as scaling? For example, a model brought in from Rhino or ZBrush that needs alterations would need to be redone in the original app that produced it. Unreal is just for lighting and positioning? Question?
guess that's more of a technical question. Yeah, Unreal doesn't really have the most sophisticated modeling tool set. So most of the time when we're previewing the sets with the directors, um, we'll just take note of any modifications if we have to move things around in that kind of sense. And that note goes back to the set designers um, to reiterate, and then we re-import in that model if we're doing handovers to VFX to keep those updated.
Yeah, and to your point, once we get into sort of or get past the like massing model, the like basic layout of the environment and the virtual stage, we do send it off to a vendor that does a high-res version, and ports it back into Unreal. So there's sort of a back and forth, but yeah, they do build outside of Unreal, kind of on an ongoing basis.
Thanks. This is all incredibly helpful. Thank you. Curious if anyone has worked with library/stock assets versus LiDAR scans, fully constructed 3D builds.
For sure. Yeah, we have. And that was sort of what I was saying at the beginning in terms of, when we have 20 weeks, however long to build something bespoke, we're building from scratch or building with the help of our department with LiDAR set pieces. Otherwise, on much shorter builds, we start with stock elements or stock pieces that we can alter, and do, like, we go through the legal aspect of it and get all the copyrights and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, we have used elements that exist if it matches our needs.
Great. Isabel Guy asks, how much more energy on a stage, one of these stages, than on a regular shoot? I don't know if you can answer that.
Yeah, I'll take that one. The wall itself, the horizontal wall, takes about 2 full generators worth, 2 1500 amp generators, which is, about the same as what a regular set would use of that scale again. And then we bring in another generator for the ceiling, and that'll run some set lights. And then we have another large generator to cool the place. It's basically a bit of an oven in there because of so much heat is coming off those panels that, especially in the summer, we need to cool the equipment and cool the people down. So I would say typically it's a little bit more than a regular set of that scale.
It's interesting. Great. I'm going to jump around to a few people who haven't asked questions yet. Brenda Schenner, she's a costume designer who I happen to know. Hi, Brenda. Any tips or tricks for costume designing on the wall?
It's really important. Again, we collaborated a lot with wardrobe, like for palette and tone, and we showed them our sets all the time. I would have meetings with the costume designer, with the art department, and we would show whoever she wanted to be there what we were planning to do in the early stages. And that kind of inspired her a little bit, or helped her, figure out what she wanted to do. But sometimes on Star Trek 2, the characters have lights on their costumes, so that would involve working with Phil and his team. So again, costume was definitely part of the whole important role of all this.
I would also add, that's right, Doug, but I would also add just testing is super important. The walls don't output full spectrum lighting. They have a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel that looks really accurate to your eye, but maybe not so much the camera. And those big spikes can go into those primary colors and give you more blue, more red, or more green than you were anticipating. So testing, and throwing a little natural light on them can help a lot as well. Like Doug, we had like primary color costumes as well. So it, bright reds, bright yellows, and bright blues. And so, we did tests, compared to film light, and there was quite a difference in the colors. So be very aware of that.
On the tails of the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add to that in terms of if we're also shooting people that are then going to become digital cards within the virtual space, things like shear elements, those kind of things wind up getting cut off. So any like veils, all those kind of things. Opaque seems to always be better for those elements. Once you're on the practical stage, it's not as troublesome, but sometimes can be with like aliasing. And so again, going back to what Phil was saying, testing those kind of things.
Doug, your hand's not up. You're just
No.
fiddling your fingers. Okay. There was another. Okay. T. Hunter McCann, on the heels of what you just was talking about colors, can you talk about pixel color wash on the practical set and how set and paint colors behave under volume lighting?
Yeah, it's same answer as the costumes. Yeah, those primary colors can pop, red especially, and that gets into skin tone as well. Yeah, you have to be very careful, do tests, in blending and in the tech rehearsal, you're watching for those colors. And we've had to adjust physically sometimes. We've had to come in and paint things down or take some colors away in prep.
You sort of answered this question during your presentation, but Nate Orman Wallace asks, is this better than filming green screen?
Again, I think there's probably pros and cons on both sides. I think it winds up being a better shoot, in my opinion, because you get collaboration from everybody. You're seeing what you're capturing in camera. And depending on how concise your director or your editor is, that can play a big factor. If you're shooting green screen and it gets carried away, it can cost you way more than if you'd shot it on a virtual production stage, and could go nuts, really.
And remember what was that single shuttle that she flew around in? Remember that, Matt? That was kind of cool because she was in a costume on a partially built thing that was hanging from the air in front of the green screen, and then Alex's people built the rest of the ship around it. So that was a neat kind of, I think, you wouldn't want to do that on the wall, but it was, we conceptualized what that thing was that was wrapped around her as a 2D thing, and it went through all the process of, it's 3D and all that stuff. And then these guys, it was really neat because it looked like this, the real thing. So I don't know if that really answers it.
Alana Macklin, what is the cost of a LiDAR screen? I imagine there's several answers to that, but
yeah, it ranges. I mean, LiDAR scanning, like for our cast and everything, it can be as low as $5,000 to $10,000 per character once they're processed, so that you have them as a virtual asset. But if you're doing a hero character, it can go all the way up to 100,000. And with scanning the actual sets, like we as the show owns a LiDAR scanner, so we'll do our own scans of the set and then have a third-party company process the point cloud so that we can then pass it off to our vendors to create models and the virtual environments. And that can be anywhere from 5 to 15,000, depending on how big the actual set is to process.
Keith Hamakawa, this is, let's see, how many frustrum simultaneous cameras can the new stage handle versus the older stages? Is the pixel pitch the same on all the stages? Can any of the stages do slow-mo, 120 frames per second?
Old versus new, it's all the processing power you have in there. So it all comes down to the graphics card that are in the stage. We're at 2. You can do more if you have more processing power. Pixel pitch is not the same on all stages. We're 2.8 millimeters. I've shot on ones that are 1.8. There's trade-offs with that. You get milky or blacks on those, but you can shoot closer to them. So it depends on your set. And we've had issues shooting slow-mo 48. Haven't even tried 120. But again, it comes down to processing power. If you had enough rendering, you could theoretically do it.
Okay, we're getting close to 8:30, but there's about a few more questions. I'm trying to pick out ones that haven't been asked yet. What video card are you running to use Unreal for these scenes? I don't know if you've answered that yet.
I mean, for me personally, I use a 4090. I don't know what the guys on set are using.
I don't even know what the actual specs are in the wall. They've got, I want to say it's 30 graphics cards in the Wilkinson wall, and I want to say they're AMD something.
They have Genlock as well. I think you're right. They're in the 30s and they have Genlock, so they're like an upgraded thing, so they can all sync up to.
This is an interesting question. Sina Nazarian. I'm developing a hybrid documentary that brings surrealist Dali-esque paintings to life using virtual production, combining practical foreground elements with deep infinity backgrounds falling onto the LED wall. As an independent filmmaker, I'm curious, with the advancements in VP technology and the refinement of workflows, do you see this approach becoming more accessible for independent filmmakers? Are there solutions or workflows that could help filmmakers at a smaller scale tap into this technology?
Totally. Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, just from my own experience, I know that there are smaller walls, and I know Matt had shown an example of them. They do exist. They do exist in town in Toronto. I mean, and throughout Canada and throughout the world, I'm sure. But the nice part is the smaller wall means a smaller footprint to build anything practically, and to also, if you're kind of keeping contained within your wall, your world can be as big as you want it to be virtually. So yeah, I do think it's coming down in price, and I do think, go to some of those smaller places and talk to them about what your hopes are and what you have to work with. For sure.
Okay. Liz Calderhead. Hi, Liz. How much power watt volt amps are, I guess, / power watt volt amps are required for 1 square foot of wall, and how many square feet is the wall? Basic question that we hadn't maybe gotten to.
It is 1,300 panels. I don't know how much each panel is. And I don't think each panel is a square foot, are they?
No, they're metric, so they're just under 2 feet, I think each one.
Yeah,
But
each panel is 20 inches.
20 inches.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what they draw. Yeah.
Imagine that can be looked up too.
Yeah. I know that the brighter you run it, the more typically it draws, and that goes for the ceiling. Sometimes it turns on at full and we all steal our eyes and the generator jumps, and until typically we're running it at a lower power, not for that reason, but for image reasons. And typically there's blacks and midtones and highlights that all kind of create a total output as opposed to max output of each panel.
Yeah, there's 3 more questions that seem different than others, so I'll just try to fit them in. Are the panels OLED? Can you turn off the pixels entirely, or is there an ever-present video black?
They are not, are they?
Not. They're LED and RGB LED, and the black level is determined by the space between the pixels. The pixels have a small gray plastic cover on them, so that raises your black level. You can turn that pixel off, and that is your black level plus whatever ambient you have in the room that's hitting that black. So it's a constant kind of battle we're fighting to keep the blacks down and keep light off the wall.
And on top of that as well, whatever atmosphere, like a lot of times we use atmosphere, like a general haze, to soften the image itself and to get volumetric lighting within the space. And so that all gets backlit as a layer on top of your blacks, which can milk out your contrast as well.
What is it, Oliver Farkas asks, what is it like working with a volume wall when you are a set deck, specifically if you are an on-set dresser?
I love the on-set dressers. Their role, I think, in my mind, anyways, as a production designer, is to maintain the integrity of the design, because on a show like Star Trek, the concepts are proved and locked in. So when they watch these things, the executives want to see that it's the concept they approved. And we were constantly struggling with this, with Phil and everybody. We always had to make it look like what it looked like in the original 2D concept. So we really relied on our set deck to help, and also make, this tweaking and moving around rocks and pieces of set dressing and framing it nicely for Phil and his camera. And so that it's exactly the same as every other show in a way, but yeah, there was more than one of them. I think usually we had a couple, two or three people doing that job.
Typically a busy job on
Yeah.
set in the wall because it is a confined space with one entrance. So everything goes in one way, and for camera, things often have to move. And if it is a set that does have a reverse, sometimes all the dressing has to be rotated 180 degrees while the crew watches you do that.
Mhm. And sometimes we had on-set greens people, well, lots of times actually. So, and everybody helped everybody, of course, Oliver.
I'm going to wind this up with one question that kind of brings it back to kind of a basic question about the art department, and how much of the assets are made by the post phys effects department versus the art department? Does the art department design all the assets that are used on the volume and in post?
Well, if you ask Matt Middleton, we do all of it. So I think I know that when on our show on Star Trek for 4 and 5, we built a lot of it. And when I watched the shows in my house after a year and a half later, it mostly looked like the concepts. But maybe
So I'll say we try to design as much as we can within the art department, conceptually. Um, the actual working file that is on the wall is provided by VFX. So there is a handoff from the art department work to the VFX vendor to execute that. And there is a collaboration after that handoff to make sure the final product, is meeting all the deliverables and requirements for director, producer, designer.
But I remember, people would tell us, like after episode season 4, for instance, that the Alex's people would be looking at concepts like months and months after we were gone, and that would to make it look like, they have integrity as well, so they want to make it look like they want the showrunner happy too. So I mean, maybe Alex would see more. I know it gets adjusted later as they maybe don't like something eventually, they tweak it a little bit, but
Sure. I mean, that does happen, but I mean, that's entirely on the showrunner side of things, not us playing with your designs. We try and stay as true to the filmscapes as possible and collaborate in that regard. That question also came from our onset data wrangler, so it was a loaded question. Hi, Varsha.
I'm just going to come on now. Is there any that was fantastic, and I don't know if you've been looking in the chat, but there's so many thank yous. Thanks for all the great information and stuff. So hopefully you're having a chance to look over there. Thank you so much, Tiana, for guiding the questions. You put together such a great list of questions, and everyone had so much to offer. Appreciate that so much. Anything final parting comments or like sum ups? Do you want to kind of go around the table there and just kind of offer your last few comments, all of you?
The only thing I was kind of going to say is, I hope that as virtual production like this sort of becomes more commonplace and more people start using volume walls, that it will become more affordable for everybody at a range of budgets. And hopefully, there will eventually be a library of Unreal worlds, the same way that we have like iStock photos and Getty photos for graphics and stuff, where you can just go in and grab assets and just tweak a couple little things. I think, and the price of the panels, I'm sure, will come down in the future as well. But it's definitely, as Doug said in the beginning, not something to be intimidated by. It's something to be excited about, because the possibilities with this are incredible.
And to that point, Tiana, there's actually, we've worked with a company called Digicore, who's already doing that in terms of building a library of assets that you can rent on a smaller scale. So yeah, that definitely is happening and will continue.
Awesome.
I think that what's important to me is just that everyone sort of the old skills of being an artist, the idea in your head, what you visualize, how you get it out on paper or on your iPad or whatever, like these old skills are still super important. And it's really important to, you know, it's an expression of you're expressing yourself as an artist, and I think that that's never going to go away. So it's just it's just another tool for you. It's like think of it as a painted backdrop or something. Like it's more than that, but it's just your own ideas and just tapping into that and just being excited about it and making it try and figure it out with a whole bunch of crazy people like you and just make it this amazing magical thing.
I completely agree with Doug. At the end of the day, it comes down to creativity and what you feel and what the audience feels, and the last step is really playful and creative and feels very freeing to shoot on these walls. Yeah.
Well, anyone else have anything you want to add? Connor? No? Anyway, thank you so much. Again, there's fantastic response in the chat, and we still have 149 people, which is really also fantastic after 2 hours. So thanks for all of your expertise and generosity in showing up tonight and taking part in this. So again, just as a reminder to everyone that's watching and to the panelists, this has been recorded and it will be available on the DGC YouTube site or DGC YouTube channel site probably later this week, early next week. And thanks to Julian Lund for making that possible. And yeah, so
Great.
Marion, thank you, Marion.
thanks
Everyone.
again.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
See y'all.